Hey everybody, today we get to welcome a new artist to the interview process. This is Jude Smith. He is currently living in Vancouver. Say hi.
Hey everyone.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about why you are in Vancouver and how you got there.
Um, so um, I got hired by a studio called Kabam back in 2014. They hired me on a 6-month contract, and so I flew out here, and then eventually they sponsored my family and I. So I moved my family out, and they gave me an extension on my visa. And about a year into working for Kabam, they made me permanent there, and we got permanent residency in Canada, and I've been working for Kabam since then.
That's absolutely amazing, man. So originally you're from the States, from I think it's Virginia. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Awesome. Okay. So before you went to Kabam, were you working freelance or were you working in-house before that?
I was working freelance, I guess, but I wasn't doing anything huge. It was a lot of like indie projects. I was working for some publishers, um, but that work it took me about a year after graduation to um, where I had about a year-long span where I was just trying to like pick up any kind of art-related project. So I wasn't really making a lot of money doing freelance that way, just because my name didn't really carry any weight to it. I didn't have any uh, really track record,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I needed a lot of growth in my portfolio at the time. So I spent a lot of time just picking up any project I could and just trying to build up my personal work, and then eventually. Kind of after a few different interviews, I started getting more and more interviews, and eventually Kabam picked me up.
That's amazing. So when you say a few interviews, does that mean that you had some unsuccessful interviews?
Yeah, I did. I interviewed with a handful of other studios, and nothing for some reason. Just everything kind of kept falling through for one reason or another.
Yeah.
I had one interview with a studio in Finland that they really liked my work, but I was definitely underqualified, and I knew that in the interview, and it went south on me, and it was so disappointing. And uh, it was like a year after I was out of college, and I was like feeling really blue about it. And then a week later, Kabam interviewed me, and then the rest kind of became history. But yeah,
So
I definitely had interviewed a few times, and nothing was kind of pulling through. So it was pretty frustrating time in my life.
yeah, man. I mean, it's interesting. Like so many people out there that I chat to, young students and the like, they get this impression that the moment they get the interview, they're gonna get the job. What would you say to
Yeah.
that?
Um, you know, I was always really hopeful, and but you just like it's such a competitive field, um, and even though I was in the States, Virginia in the East Coast in general, there isn't a lot of there aren't a lot of studios. I didn't really have any connections. I was from a really small town, um, so it was a bit of a challenge just trying to get my work out there enough that someone would take interest. So uh, it was kind of daunting, honestly, starting off, just trying to find work.
Yeah. And so to speak to a little bit about that journey for yourself, are you a self-taught artist or did you attend some kind of education system?
Um, I my parents were always really supportive of the arts when I was growing up. So at a young age, they signed me up for like painting classes. I did a lot of like acrylic and oil painting as a kid. Um, and then I kind of dropped off from art for a while, but I always kind of drew a lot as a kid and a teenager, like on my own. I would just like one of my earliest memories is of just tracing pictures of Batman, but I was always just drawing on my own. And then in college is when I decided to take it seriously again.
Mm.
And and so I went to the Art Institute for 3 years.
Okay. And that had, would you say, a profound impact on your art, or do you think it just got you started?
Um, I had a few teachers that were really good, but um, honestly, the Art Institute probably wasn't the best school for me. Um, I really kind of the degree was what was the most useful thing I got out of college. But when I was graduating from college, I reached out to a handful of artists just to get a critique on my work, to kind of see where I was at, because I felt like at the time that I wasn't really up to par yet, and I did really good in college. I graduated at the top of my class, um, and got an award for my portfolio, but I still kind of knew that I wasn't at an industry standard. So I reached out to some artists, and they gave me some feedback on, you know, what I needed to improve on. So for a year, like I really just kind of grinded away, just rebuilding my portfolio until someone until there was a studio that was willing to hire me, basically.
That's really interesting. How did you know that you weren't up to par?
A lot of it was my technique. I kind of knew that my technique wasn't there. I used to still in college for the majority of my time there. I still like to draw things out on paper, scan it in, and then like paint over top of it in Photoshop. And I started watching videos on like YouTube, like Feng Zhu's his FCD. He has a bunch of really good videos that kind of like opened my eyes. And then Level Up also was pretty big at the time, so I started watching interviews with a bunch of artists on there.
Yeah.
Um, and so I started to dive further into like just doing things completely in Photoshop, which really started to boost my work. And I was also really fearful of 3D. I did not have a good experience in college learning 3D. Um, so I hated it the first time I ever tried it. I was trying like 3ds Max and Maya, and
Hmm.
I couldn't grasp it. It took me 2 hours to one time make like a simple like ice cream cone, and I was just
Just
so fed
primitive.
up. Yeah, I was so fed up with it, and then I kind of saw that 3D was becoming more impactful in the industry.
Mm.
So I signed up for Gemma Jurabaev's 3D code class on Learn Squared, and that just like that boosted my confidence a lot. I improved a lot with using 3D code and Keyshot in my workflow a bit, and yeah, I just kind of started tackling my insecurities, I guess, and that really boosted my work.
That's amazing, man. And it's what's really interesting to me is that journey of yours, because like I'm trying to just distill a little bit about like looking at your work, I see a lot of 3D in there and I see a lot of realism in there. Is that something you've always gravitated towards?
Yeah, well, I am really nitpicky about details, and I'm trying to learn to let go of that now these days, and not just cram everything with the realistic details. But yeah, I I as like starting off when I was like a kid, I did a lot of like life studies and painting from life. So I've always had a interest in like realism. Um, and then a lot of the films that I like, I'm really into like Neil Blomkamp and like Ode Studios,
Awesome.
and I like kind of that realism twist on sci-fi. So
Hmm.
a lot of that had a pretty big impact on me when I was going into college.
Okay. So, I mean, while you're mentioning all this, might as well, take a look at some of your old work, which I know is a fan favorite. on the channel. So let's just dive in and see if I can't share some of that here. All right, so you should be able to see my screen. Here we go. This is the first piece you have up on DeviantArt, and yes, everybody, we had to go to DeviantArt to dig deep.
Uh,
It's like, I think there are some youngsters out there who probably don't even know what DeviantArt is, other than the place you go to look at furry art. But like, I think DeviantArt for a lot of us, when I think it was CG, I can't even remember the name of it now.
CG Hub.
CG Hub was the big portfolio site. It was sort of like the
Mhm.
pre-ArtStation, and that
Yeah.
was like quite hardcore. Like, I think only the best of the best were up there. I remember everyone just saying like, oh, you have to be super pro to be on there,
Yeah,
and it's just kind of gravitated towards DeviantArt.
yeah, what's funny is I didn't know what CG Hub was for a long time, and then right as I found it, it got shut down.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, it's like when it got shut down, everyone in the industry just had a meltdown. They're like, what do we do
yeah,
now? We've lost like conceptart.org and now CG Hub. Like, what's left? And there must have
yeah,
been a spike in DeviantArt submissions around that time from pros, and then of course ArtStation shut up, and everything's been pretty much different since then. So yeah, I'm
yeah.
seeing a lot of this realism that you were talking about, but now we're like jumping into this, and I see like super. This is something I wanted to speak to. Is like, I see even in your early work, like this kind of stuff here, and even a little bit after this, like there is a definite fascination with the fundamentals. Like, I see really strong perspective in your work, especially with your vehicles, like the way you break them down and draw them out. I can see that you're mirroring effectively. How do you feel about looking back at that and saying like you spent time to learn those skills? How do you think it had a dramatic impact on your work?
Yeah, I think that's what's always kind of kept me grounded. I think that the fundamentals are a lot of times people want to skip past the fundamentals and get to like the fun effects and like Photoshop, or they get caught up in the trance of 3D. But if you don't like understand the fundamentals, then you kind of have nothing to build off of. Um, it definitely helped me a lot. And coming from a traditional background, um, I think kept me pretty grounded for when I was starting out.
Absolutely. So what exactly got you into concept art? Because I'm looking at a lot of your work and a lot of the early stuff, and I see this in actually quite a lot of concept art portfolios, is this attraction to comic books early on and to just drawing. Where was the transition for you? What actually got you into this?
When I think I was about like 13 or 14, and I was getting more into anime and manga artists at the time. There was this great book. Actually, I have it here somewhere. I'll pull it up. It was like these books that just have like a bunch of manga artists and anime artists.
That's awesome.
And I saw that they it kind of shows breakdowns of how they paint in Photoshop. And each artist has a different technique, and so I found that really interesting. And then I came across the art of the art of Star Wars for episode 2 and 3, and I was
Mm,
just blown away that this is how people could use art, because I was really into painting, and but I didn't realize that that artists were being used for like entertainment purposes, um, and in film and video games, and that really I kind of spiraled at that point, and I kind of early on had decided that I wanted to do concept art, but then there was a time period where I kind of branched off and did some other things for a while. But yeah, early on, I definitely had an interest in doing concept art.
yeah, that's amazing, man. I think a lot of people just kind of hit that first initial realization of, what, people get paid for this? And then they kind of go, are you sure they get paid to do art, but it makes movies? And then it just like
Yeah,
blows their mind, and they're like, okay,
yeah,
I think I need to
yeah.
do
No,
this now.
I was astounded. I was like, these guys are just they're painting, but they're painting Jedis and stormtroopers and spaceships. I was like, what? why did I think of this?
Yeah, how is this a job? Do you ever pinch yourself now thinking like I get to work in this industry and I get paid handsomely for it? Like what's up with that?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate. Right. I mean, even now, like I feel very fortunate to be making a living and being able to support my family doing this. So yeah, yeah, I remember the first time I started at Kabam, and it was on my first day, and I sat down at my desk, and they're like, here's your equipment, here's everything, let's get started. And I was just like, I can't believe like I've gotten to this point and I'm
Yeah.
getting paid every day to come in here and sit here and draw. And I was like paranoid for a while. I was like, I feel like one day someone's gonna like, the CEO or someone's gonna come by and be like, wait, we're paying this guy to do what? Like, but
Absolutely.
uh, but yeah, no, it was a really good feeling, and I'm glad that every day that I get to continue working doing this for a living.
Totally. And I mean, you had quite a vast jump from your freelance, let's call it career or time, into a professional studio where, maybe the zeros on that check, suddenly there's a moment where you're like, what? Like, did you have a
Yeah,
moment where it was like there was like, I don't know, you just mentioned like there's a sense of this sort of like imposter syndrome, but then it hits you and you're like, I'm here. And then a month passes and you're like, I'm still here. And then you're like still pinching yourself after a month. Like, did you find that?
I still have imposter syndrome. It that feeling kind of never goes away, especially if you're pushing yourself, and
Yeah,
I try not to stay stagnant ever. Um,
100%.
and yeah, there's just days sometimes where you get a new task and you're like, I'm not sure how like I'm even going to approach this, and
Yeah.
then those insecurities start to set in, but then you just have to remind yourself like, I do this every day, like this is not really a big deal, like I just gotta like settle and start with sketches and just get
Yeah.
those ideas out there.
Yeah.
So
And get
yeah,
that tasty feedback telling you that you're going in the right direction. It's like, oh, thank the Lord.
yeah, yeah.
So
No, I mean
yeah.
that year gap was definitely a struggle too, because I had a job as a graphic designer,
Hmm.
and I was fired from that job, and I was only a few months into it, and I didn't really know why. They didn't tell me at the time. They just kind of let me
Oof.
go.
Oof. No
And
closure.
late,
That's the worst.
yeah, and later I found out it was because the guy replaced one of his old job back, so they let me go and hired him back. But I didn't know that,
Mm,
and so out of college, I felt like I was like, great, like I failed at this job I that was sort of art related, but not really in the realm of what I want to do, and apparently I can't even do this right,
yeah.
and
It's one
so
one after the other. Mm,
yeah, so I got kind of depressed after a while because and then interviews kind of kept falling through and
yeah.
nothing kind of panned out.
Yeah.
Uh, and there was even a point where one night I was talking to my wife, and I was like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. I'm a year out of college, and I did really well there, but now nothing is happening. I couldn't hold that job. Uh, and the freelance work is kind of drying up, and I wasn't sure what to do, and I actually had applied to Walmart and McDonald's at the time because I was like, I need to find a more steady income.
Yeah.
And it was a week later that I heard from Kabam, and thankfully, you know, that was not the direction I had to go into, working, you know, for
Yeah.
fast food or something. And that starting that first day at Kabam, I was just like, yeah, it was. I felt like I was living in a dream, basically. I couldn't believe that it had all worked out for me at the time.
Yeah.
So
It feels like winning the lottery because you went from 0 to 100 in one go.
yeah,
And it's like the emotional roller coaster is something that I feel most people don't talk about when like trying to get into this industry. Is like, yes, there's a mental component in terms of building skill and being confident, but then like you will be knocked down. Like people will say
Yeah.
no, people will ghost you, they will not reply to you. You'll do an interview and it'll fail, and you might not get closure on that interview if you ask for it.
Yeah.
You know, you say like, hey, what went wrong, or like, what could I improve on, and they don't respond. Like these things happen. This certainly happened to me in one form or another, and they've happened to most people I know in one form or another. And sometimes you never know, like if that job was necessarily not for you. They just thought you as a candidate weren't a good fit, and they just don't tell you about it. So it's kind of crazy. It's kind of like it's infuriating to not know where you stand a lot of the time. And there's this really weird thing that happens with artists where I feel like we put our heart and soul into what we do. It literally feels like you're painting a piece of your soul into everything you do. Like it's not because we want to do that, it's just that that's a byproduct of producing something. I think it's actually a byproduct of creativity. It's almost like you're channeling something to come through you into onto like a page. And like
Yeah.
I remember listening, like for example, to like all these like heroes of ours when we were starting out, of like, you know, don't take your work personally as a concept artist and all this stuff. And it's like, it's still art, man. You're still like, you probably got into it because you loved art. You probably didn't get into it because you love design. Very few people do. So when we have that base instinct as an artist, I feel like we're trying to just not get annihilated by this soul attack. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, that is definitely the case, especially when you're starting out, because for me, like I'd go to work, and every night, I was working until like 1, 2 in the morning and just grinding away, and it was hard because like you say, you put your heart and soul into your work, and and it sucks when you finish a piece and it doesn't do well, and it's still like you're still not there and you're still missing things, but that the grind is the only way up. So it it is definitely a bit of a punch to the emotions, but sticking to it and grinding away
Mm-hmm.
is the only way you'll get there. And I've discovered that you know a lot of artists are willing to give you feedback and give you advice and insights. So it's you don't want to run away from that fear of progression.
Yeah.
Um, it can kind of be hard to settle and just kind of bite that bullet and accept that where you are. But the moment where you accept that you're not where you want to be, or your art isn't as good as what it should be, is the moment that you start improving. And when I graduated, that I think was key for me, and why I'm thankful that I reached out to other artists, because they were honest with me, and their honesty made me look at my portfolio in another way, and I really just pushed really hard to improve. And I looked at the level of work around me being posted on ArtStation and even DeviantArt, and I just um, not so much compared my artwork, I guess, but just compared the quality of my work versus other people, and looked on how I could bring my quality up.
Absolutely. And being objectively self aware of your artwork and the quality of where you are at a particular time is one of the factors, I think, to raising the bar on your career, whether it's getting your first job or getting the second, third, fourth, maybe the dream job at the end of the
Mhm.
day. And even as professionals, I don't think we stop that process. We just kind of self reflect on where we want to go. So, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the journey there of breaking into the industry from, let's call it a less than professional place, and ask you two things. The first, let's cover that first, is you got married before you went on this whole journey of like breaking into the industry. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you find the support system at home for yourself? Did that really help you, like when you were hitting walls?
Yeah, it's funny too, because my daughter was born three months before I graduated college too. So there that's kind of when reality kind of set in for me, because um, I was like, man, like I have a whole family that I have to support now
Hmm.
based on my artwork, and my art's not good enough to get me a job yet. So, um, but my wife has always been extremely supportive since we met. She has always allowed me to have time to work on my portfolio and work on freelance on top of the work that my day job.
Hmm.
Um, so, and then her family has always been supportive of us too when we were starting out, and the same as my family. They got me
Amazing.
through
Mm.
college. So having support is extremely helpful in this, you know, when you're starting out. Yeah, I don't know how I would have been able to have done it without them.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, it's a really it's a blessing at the end of the day, because like not everybody has that. And there's also this misconception of like when you finish high school and you're in college and you're making these decisions about where you want to take your career, if you're really young, you're not really thinking about those levels of consequences to having a family, having responsibility, paying rent. Like the reality of life hasn't quite hit you right out of like high school for a lot of people. I'm not saying everybody.
Yeah,
And so I feel like there is a certain kick up the butt when the carpet is pulled out from underneath you, and you kind of realize sometimes it's not just you. You're not on this journey for yourself, and then you have this added responsibility of maybe another life, or some kind of coupling that you're in. And then suddenly it's like, okay, I don't just need to be a badass artist for myself. I'm doing this for a way bigger reason. And I feel like that is just such an advantage. It's such a kick up the butt. What do you think?
yeah, it was definitely tough. It was a tough reality to kind of swallow at that time, but like you said, it was the motivation I think I needed to push myself further. Um, I through college, I think I had a lot of the right ideas, and I was doing a lot of the right things.
Hmm.
Um, but but like you said, the reality of of how tough it can be to kind of break into the industry hadn't really set in at the time.
Yeah.
Um, I think a lot of the misconception for students when going into the entertainment industry, specifically for video games and film, is that you assume the college is going to provide you a job afterwards.
Yeah.
But and specifically for concept art, there's very limited amount of jobs out there every year, and colleges churn out hundreds of students a year. Um, so there is a very steep um, uh, there's a very limited amount of jobs every year, and so I I, I think that colleges need to be a little more open sometimes about the realities
Yeah.
of of the industry.
Yeah.
um, and then I think students also just need to be a little more aware too.
Hmm.
Um, it, I think the Art Institute at the time was telling us that there was like a 70% success rate for students like 6 months out of college, but if you look at the breakdown, it wasn't. It
Yeah.
wasn't.
Nowhere even
Yeah,
close.
it was just students finding jobs. It wasn't students finding jobs related to their field. So uh,
Exactly.
yeah, so um, I think if yeah, and then a lot of I think the misconception too is that you know students sometimes just think, oh, drawing is fun and video games is fun, but they don't realize how much actual work it is
Yeah.
to be in that industry. Like it's not fun in games, pun intended, but it's a crazy amount of work, and
Yeah.
And students often seem to think that if you do the bare minimum in college and you do good in class,
Yes.
then
Then it's
you'll
guaranteed.
find success. But
Yeah.
that's not the case. You have to
Yeah.
push yourself so much outside of college.
Exactly.
And I like every time I go home from class, I just worked on personal work, or I would do my homework and then continue working on personal work. It was never for me just doing classwork. Um, and
And I mean,
uh,
that's why the college recognized you as the best student, because you were doing extra, extra, extra. But for yourself, that's really fascinating to me, because you're kind of an anomaly in that system, because most people don't do that. So what do you think it was about you? Did you see how hard it was at the beginning? Did you look outside of college and start to make some judgment calls and say, I need to work a lot harder than I am, and I need to be a lot further than I am in order to get a job?
I think I was just a little more aware of the artists in the industry, than maybe some people. I pay a lot of attention, and paid a lot of attention to who artists were at the time. I would surf, CG Society, and just look at all the amazing artwork that was on there,
Yeah.
um, and just any book I could find, any YouTube channel I could find of an artist showing, their workflow, or talking, any talk about the industry I could get my hands on. I would pay attention to, um, and I think that um, I think that's why you see a lot of successful artists who don't go to college or don't have an art degree of any sort, because they push themselves really hard online, finding anything that they can,
Hmm.
um, to kind of boost their work. And so,
So would you say at the end of the day that work is determined by the quality, not necessarily the journey?
yeah, absolutely. The college degree helped me get to Canada for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if they would have been able legally for my visa to. I don't think they could have gotten me as easily over here
Yeah.
without that. So if you're working, you're a student in Europe, or anywhere, any other country, and you're trying to get into another country,
Hmm.
um, especially the States, if you have a college degree, it's a lot easier.
Hmm.
That being said, the college degree isn't kind of the end all be all.
Yeah. The
Um,
piece of paper itself isn't the key.
yeah, but it does help immensely. So
Yeah. It's useful for travel, not for the job. Is that fair?
yeah, visas, it's a huge benefit.
Yeah.
But skill, like, portfolio is the most important thing.
Yeah. And it's man, it's such a fascinating story to me, because it's like there's so many people out there who are maybe in a system of education that's weak, and yet it's offering them the college degree that can give them options, and yet are they wasting their time and money? It's like this weird catch 22 that exists of like, if someone is living in a remote country where there isn't much opportunity, or even a town that is really remote, it's like, well, what are my options? And as you said, like when you're starting out and you're trying to make a name for yourself, you can't exactly pick the studio that you want to go for unless you've spent all your time gearing your work towards that studio. It's more like, where can I apply to get a foot in? And that might not even be in your native country.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, let's dive into some of the stuff you're doing right now for Kabam. Obviously, we're not going to dig into like specifics, because all of that's under wraps. But can you tell us a little bit about like what's a typical workday for you? And could you tell us a little bit about your design process when it comes to actually delivering on a brief?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I can talk a little bit about what I'm working on because the game is already announced. But
Bonus.
yeah, it's called Marvel Realm of Champions.
Ooh.
But um, so yeah, on this project, I do a lot of characters mostly, but I've done environments and lots of props too.
Hmm.
Um, and um, we, the workflow there is really easy. Usually I usually have week deadlines, but they're pretty loose. We don't have a ton of pressure um,
Awesome.
on us to like crunch or anything,
Hmm.
and so it's pretty straightforward.
So it's a
We just get
well-managed studio, is what you're saying?
yeah, yeah, it is. They're pretty efficient.
Amazing. That is rare, but good.
So yeah, so usually since it's Marvel, a lot of times I'll get tasked to do a specific character, and they'll be like, hey, we're gonna do like our version of this character. So usually there's a lot to go off of, whether it's comics or movies, and we kind of do some sketch iterations, and then we'll get feedback from the art director or the character artist, and we'll start polishing them up, and then do like a final pass eventually. So it's all very straightforward. Um, uh, One of my coworkers, she does a lot of the environment concepts, and she uses like Blender and Octane and 3D code. So she's crazy talented.
Hmm.
Um,
Is that for
and so
paintings or do they reuse it as assets?
no, it's for paintings. Yeah,
Okay.
she's a concept artist,
Okay.
and Kelly McLaurin, she is really good. But yeah, so they're very open to our how we like to approach drawing, doing our artwork, and as long as we hit our deadlines, we're good. So it's a nice, easy paced studio. Um, yeah,
Yeah, man.
very
That's
straightforward.
Yeah, for me, that's living the dream because I've worked for a bunch of studios, and what I've noticed is that there's definitely a difference between, hectic studios where things are chaotic, especially in the film industry. I find personally, I just think the film industry is pretty nuts. Like it's like constant changes, constant like updates to location. Things are just intense, and
Yeah,
then that filters down to departments. And I found that the video game industry, I don't know if this is just my impression, but I felt it more ordered than anything else, and I found that a really nice place to work. If you get into a really good video game company, it's actually a pleasure. It's just, it flows really smoothly.
yeah. I've never worked in film, so I don't fully understand the comparison, but from my impressions, that seems to definitely be the case. And I've thought about going into film before,
Hmm.
but I kind of like the pacing of video games and the time that's kind of allowed to develop them. Uh, so I think, eventually, I think overall I'll probably want to stay in video games,
Mm.
but it would be fun to dip my toes into film,
Yeah.
here and there.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I'm seeing some kind of premonition about the video game industry and the film industry starting to merge. Not now, but in the next 10 years, definitely I see some transition, some crossover, because we're already seeing, you know, direct to consumer, Netflix high budget productions. We're seeing things like, the Mandalorian, where they've completely revamped the green screen into like just digital screens as
Yeah.
background props and things like that. And I'm starting to see these trends starting to pop up, and I'm like, where's this all going? Do you think that there could be a crossover between something like a hyper real VR and like a cinematic experience where you as the player are actually experiencing the journey?
Yeah, it's VR is so early in its stages. But I do feel like video games are becoming more of a popular source of storytelling. You look at games like The Last of Us. You look
Hmm.
at the Arkham games, BioShock, and even now, there was a while that um, we started to see a drop in single player games, but
Hmm.
this next generation of games, starting with like Horizon Zero Dawn, Death
Hmm.
Stranding, Ghost of Tsushima, we're
Yeah.
seeing this wave again of single player games. So I think that eventually, uh, I think video games will have more of an impact on a main source of people's entertainment. I mean, already the gaming industry is outselling the film industry. It's
Yeah.
been outselling the music industry. So um, I think as our generation gets older, it's going to be more of a focus. And I think film, like you said, will trickle into that, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, in our time, you and I, getting into the industry, I think we sort of were around the same period where we saw things like CG Society and all those websites. So I'm assuming we experienced the same impact and impression of the industry at large. And it seems to me that today, versus when I was growing up as a kid, like there are way more people into video games and movies now than there have ever been. And I'm talking across like, whatever sexual orientation or where you come from, like people are just immersed in entertainment right now. um
Yeah,
does that sound like that's real for you? Like, do you see that happening?
definitely. I mean, just look at how the industry has changed as for students. I'm sure, like you said, um, I don't know how old you are exactly, but I'm 29, and so growing up, there wasn't a lot of information on the gaming industry
Hmm.
and what concept artists do. But now, there are just hundreds of people and kids that are like, really young, like just getting into it and already really good and know how to make games. And you see a lot of indie developers who
Yep.
are really young, and the indie gaming industry is huge right now. Sony
Hmm.
backs tons of those studios and projects. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it's in a huge boom right now, and luckily that's an advantage for people like us right now. There's a lot of work out there, um, and and interesting enough, um, I've been doing a lot of freelance this summer. Um, because of COVID,
Hmm.
the industry is up by 30%, I think,
Yeah.
and I've been able to work for a handful of other studios this summer. They've just had lots of work for me, which has been really great, and I've got to
Yeah.
work on some really awesome projects. And so, yeah, I think that for now things are going to just continue trending up.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a little bit about the whole COVID situation, and you've just told me quite a lot, but I want to know, do you think that the trend of freelancing is something that is going to continue, where artists are being given a little bit more freedom to work from home with a little bit more trust because the industry needs us to be working remotely? Do you feel like this idea of running a really expensive overhead on studios is ever going to go away? Like, do you think we've changed?
Yeah, I am curious as to how much this will change, because obviously there are some people who don't like working from home and it's not a convenient setup, but for people like me and a lot of other artists, I feel like I've been a lot more productive from home. um, the whole reason I took up freelancing was because I had a lot of downtime, just because I'm not commuting anymore.
Hmm.
I'm really not leaving uh, the block that I live on. And so I had a lot of extra time, and I had a studio reach out to me about doing some freelance. So I picked it up, and it kind of snowballed from there. And then another studio reached out to me, so I just kind of added to it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's nice having a little bit of an extra income too. So can't really complain about that, and getting to work on other exciting projects. So I think I think eventually we're going to see maybe studios not go full time where everyone's remote, but maybe to the point where um, people come in, maybe a couple times a week for
Hmm.
meetings to kind
Yeah.
of touch base with the whole team, but then the rest of the week you're working from home.
Yeah. And I do wonder about that. I've actually chatted to a number of my friends who aren't in the entertainment industry, just to see various opinions on this. And there definitely feels like a lot of people saying, well, I'd love to just go in once or twice to touch base. And then you have the other school of people who say, oh man, I love going into work because like I get away from like the mundaneness of my, you know, existence at home with my family, whatever it is, as horrible as that is to say. But
Yeah,
it's a reality for a lot of people where it's like, you know, there seems to be a lot in the air right now, and I don't think things are going back to the way they were 100%. I think people have had a taste of what it
yeah,
looks like.
yeah. No, I mean, I know people who've been like, I'm never going back to the studio. Like they're gonna fire me before I go back in.
Wow.
So um, yeah, but I do actually miss being in the house. I miss being with the rest of the concept team
Yeah,
and being able to bug them on a daily basis and seeing how they work. So
yeah,
I mean, I do that as much as I can just on GChat or whatever. Um, but yeah, I there are definitely a lot of benefits from working from home. Um, but I do miss being in house.
yeah.
So
There is
I
also
could,
like a sense of camaraderie that is really nice.
yeah,
You just
for
can't get
sure.
that over Skype, you know, or whatever system
Yeah,
you're using to chat. Like it's kind of lost a little bit.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I like being around other artists because like growing up, as I like mentioned, being from like a small town, no one kind of knew what concept art was there, and I had a few friends that were sort of interested in it, but not very seriously. Um, so I was always kind of starving to kind of be around other like-minded people.
Yeah.
And when I started working in Vancouver, I was just like I was so eager to meet people and to be around other artists, and I feel like I thrive a lot being around um, being around other people in the industry. So I definitely miss being in house. Um, I would be maybe okay with being part time in house, but yeah, I do like being in house for sure.
Yeah. So I guess that kind of comes full circle to this idea of you've been busy in-house with Kabam for a while. Have you given any thought to maybe what you'd still like to achieve with your artistic career moving forward?
Yeah, um, I doing the freelance has been really eye opening to me because I kind of have um, I haven't always um, I've been kind of I guess wary of diving into it, uh, just not knowing if I could handle that kind of schedule, or knowing if I was really good enough to do some of the work. But it's been really easy, honestly, and I've noticed because I've only really up until this year worked for Kabam, but a lot of studios have reached out to me because of my portfolio now and
Mm-hmm.
how much I've kind of updated it, and I get people now that specifically want my work for what they see me post, and
Yeah.
that's been really great. And that's work that I really love doing and I
Yes.
enjoy taking on. So when studios reach out to me for that specifically, um, it it almost doesn't feel like work, I guess, because I just get to kind of do the stuff that I would be doing anyway in my personal time. So
Yeah.
um, so
No,
it's
that
been it's been fun, and I would love to, I'll probably take on more work eventually, freelancing. I'm working with a few studios right now, but yeah, I kind of, um, since I have so much downtime because of this COVID stuff, that's kind of why I'm just taking it on. But yeah, I actually, um, I will be starting a new full-time job here pretty soon. So I'll be stepping back from the freelance work for a little bit, and then just getting acquainted with this other studio. So
Yeah, amazing, man. And it's really interesting that you mentioned that the artwork in your portfolio is what attracted people because I'm forever telling people you got to be a little bit careful of your personal work because if you put all your personal work in there and some of it is pretty varied, you might be hired on that really obscure thing you did. Like people are like, hey,
Mhm.
we want you to come work in-house and do all these assets that look exactly like that thing you did. And you're like, oh my God, that was not my intention. Like that was just for myself. And then it's like, oh man, should I take it? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's funny because a studio had reached out to me recently, and they wanted me to do something that wasn't in the realm of what some of my recent work was.
Mm,
And they were really interested, but they're like, "Are you okay with doing this? We see like that you have a lot of character work," and I was like, I was like, yeah, it's funny that that they that they were a little timid on that, and that they were worried that I wouldn't want to take the work, um, because I was like, I this is just something I do in my free time. I'm happy to do other things too. So yeah, you are right. You gotta pay attention to what you put out there because that is what um, clients or studios will reach out to you for. So
yeah. I remember when I was in college, we had this really incredible mentor. He was our animation mentor because I went to an animation college actually, and he worked on like some of these really old school like movies. Like he worked on Batman, like the original with with Keaton, and like all this
yeah.
amazing like prop work and miniature work. And one of the things he said was, um, no one will believe you're a great generalist until you show them that you can do multiple things. It's like being a great generalist kind of flies in the face of what people think generalists are. So he's like,
Mhm.
people wouldn't believe that he could do something that he didn't display. So when he proved it, they were just like, whoa, you're multidimensional, right? And that's the weird thing is like, I see, yes, you can put yourself in a niche in terms of appeal where you do get the jobs. People come to you, they want to work with you specifically for that thing. But there's also the chance that you can, whip out something special and go like, well, I could work on a bigger project, maybe take a lead
Mhm.
position on something as opposed to just a midweight position. And that is such leverage and no one will ever know. I mean, I look at your work, I look at your portfolio and stuff, and I see so much variety in ability. And I look back at some of your old stuff, like so, there was like a moment in your artistic progression where I can see they're integrating really complex ideas of like, how do I make something look real, have it designed, and then integrate it into like a homogeneous image, right? I could
Mhm.
see the process you were like developing there, and then there was a moment where it just clicked, and like your
Yeah.
your faces looked amazing, like your expressions were there, the action was there, the lighting improved. Like, what do you think? What was that? Like, how did you make such a great jump there?
Is there a specific? I guess it depends. I've had a few moments, I
Mm.
guess. Was there any like particular piece that you're referring to?
No, I just think the quality, like it just sort of
Mm.
like for me, just looking at your personal work, it's like the way it jumps. I can't look at it right now because we're talking, but
Yeah.
there definitely seems to
Uh,
be a jump, and I think those jumps are pretty important in one's career because it's like stepping outside of what you're comfortable with long enough to get really good at it.
yeah. Actually, I a couple years ago, actually, I went to a massive black workshop in Seattle,
Hmm.
and this was the first time that I had gone to a workshop um, like this, and I I brought my portfolio in to get critiqued, and I met Marco Jurevich there,
Amazing, yeah.
and I knew that he was going to be pretty blunt with his
Great.
critique, and he definitely was, and he really ripped the portfolio apart. Like he really gave me a harsh critique,
Yeah.
and and I'm really glad that he did because um, his points were very valid. And at the time, I felt that I was plateauing with my work. Like it was good, but like I just
Mm.
was kind of like I wasn't sure what was next at that point.
Hmm.
And and he just like immediately like a couple pages into it, like he was just like ripping it apart. Like he really went after um, my work and and a lot of it was that my work was too detailed. It was too just crammed with noise, and there was no focus. And a lot of his he was like, a lot of his critique was saying that when I look at your work, I don't see um, I don't see your voice. I don't see what the purpose is here.
Mm.
Um, and there's no focus. And he was saying that I needed to kind of learn to base my designs off of an idea a little bit more, and to think of a story to kind of ground my work in, um, and to let go of just all this noise, basically. Um, so I took what he said to heart, and focused a lot. With a lot of the characters that I've posted recently, I was thinking, how do I take just a character by itself, and how do I make this one thing read? How do I make this? How do I make a character tell a story by just looking at it,
Mm.
without without it being in a scene, without it being in an environment to help kind of push that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so um, I focused a lot on what he said, and implementing that into my work. And since then, my work has um, kind of blown up a little bit for me, and now I'm able to freelance for studios that I really like, and people will reach out to me specifically for what they see in my work. And and yeah, I'm really glad.
That's Well, that's incredible, man.
Yeah,
I want to speak to something there, which I think is like when someone gives you feedback like that, what can happen is that you go away thinking, okay, let me try implement some of these ideas. And when you do, you might be hitting those new ideas with maybe 10%, 20% of what that person was trying to push towards you. And then like the moment you hit like that 40, 50% of what they were trying to say, your work elevates, and then people notice already, like just from
mhm,
50% of what they told you. Imagine
yeah,
now you're still on that journey and you take it to 100%. What's going to happen, right? Your
yeah,
work's just going to blow up like completely.
yeah, yeah. No, it's really important to listen to critiques, and and now I kind of think about it. It's a lot like, it was kind of like another moment like it was when I was getting ready to graduate from college, which is like I was hitting a wall, and I knew that he was going to be blunt with me on that critique. So, which was why I went to him, and he's also just an amazing artist who I really
Step
respect.
on me, senpai.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So it was good. It stung. It definitely stung to hear some of his feedback, but I knew that it was what I needed to hear, and it definitely boosted my work a lot.
Yeah. Well, that is actually the perfect segue because I wanted to ask you, what do you think you define as being a successful artist today versus what you thought it was when you were starting out?
Um, well, starting off, it's a lot of technique. There's a lot of emphasis on technique and learning the
Mm,
fundamentals, and understanding the history of art. But now that I kind of look back, it's self-discipline. Um, it's
hmm.
it's being able to stick with something. It's being able to push yourself, even when you feel like you've kind of pushed yourself already. Like, you just gotta lean um, into your work, and um, evaluating yourself and where you're at, and and being able to uh, kind of stick with an idea and push past. Uh,
Some of the walls, maybe.
yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think of how to kind of word it the right way. It's like when you're not where you should be, um, and you have like a target goal of where
Mhm.
you want to get, and it can
Mm.
be a challenge to kind of get there, but you just, it's that self-discipline and learning to look for feedback, or
Mm.
signing up for a class and something
Mm.
that you're afraid of, and just really pushing yourself in areas that you're insecure. So
That's amazing,
uh,
man.
yeah.
That's super insightful. I love that. So, speaking of experience, which I think you have earned a lot of it to this point, I was going to ask you, based on your own experience, do you have any recommended advice for artists who want to break into this industry and are sort of dabbling with the idea of like, what am I aiming for when I'm starting out?
Yeah, I would look at where you want to go, basically.
Hmm.
Think about what it is, what your end goal is.
Hmm.
Whether it's a studio you want to work for, whether it's you want to freelance, and but what is the kind of work you want to do as a freelancer, um, and 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 really gear your work in that direction. I see a lot of times that students get hung up on, oh, I'm just gonna learn, the fundamentals. I'm just gonna do tutorials. I'm just gonna study for a year, and then I'll start doing my portfolio. Um, but you know, if you're not building your portfolio while you're doing studies, and you're not taking those studies and relating them to your personal work,
Yeah.
you don't you're not understanding how those fundamentals and that those studies and all that work relates to real world work.
Yes.
Um, so constantly, like if you sign up for a class, do make a portfolio piece out of that class. Don't just do the class and shove the work away and hide it and not share that.
Hmm.
Do it for a purpose.
Yeah.
Uh,
Go
you
hard.
know, yeah, always gear that work towards portfolio work and where it is you want to work, or the kind of work you want to do. Don't just do studies for the sake of studies, because um, you don't kind of see how those studies are implemented into real life.
Yeah, 100%. That's solid, man. Solid advice. So that about wraps it up for our interview today with Jude. Jude, thank you so much for sharing with us all of your wisdom and your hard-earned, success with your career. And I know for a fact, looking at your portfolio, seeing your growth as an artist, I know you're destined for really, really big things still already,
Uh,
progressing you ever forward and into amazing places. And I personally can't wait to see where you go. That's why I'm keeping a strong eye on you. Thank you so
thanks.
much for taking the time today.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.